He seized a moment when Barbara's attention was engaged by his nephew, to say something that his hostess rather resented. "The young lady does not look so well as I had imagined she would. I suppose her health is quite good at present?" "She has complained of nothing," Mademoiselle Thérèse returned, bridling. "Why should she be ill? The food is excellent and abundant, and we do everything imaginable for the comfort of our inmates." "I am sure you do, madame," he replied, bowing. "I shall have the pleasure of calling upon you again, I hope, before long. As I knew Miss Britton, it is natural for me to take an interest in her niece when in a foreign land. Your aunt, I suppose, is now in England?" he added casually to Barbara. "Yes, staying with us for a day or two, but I hope she will come here before I go, and we can make an excursion on our way home." "That would be pleasant for both, I am sure," Mr. Morton replied, taking a ceremonious leave of Mademoiselle Thérèse, and a simple, though warmer one of Barbara. The young man said little in parting, but as soon as they were in the street he laid his hand hurriedly on his uncle's arm. "The girl is ill, uncle, I am sure of it. She is not like the same person I met before, and that Mademoiselle Thérèse would drive me crazy if I weren't feeling up to the mark." "No doubt. What a tongue the woman has! But what do you want to do, Dennis, for of course you have made up your mind to do something?" Dennis frowned. "Of course I don't want to seem interfering, but I won't say anything at home in case of frightening her mother. But," he paused and looked up at his uncle, "do you think it would seem impertinent to write to the aunt? She might come a little sooner, perhaps, and being at Mrs. Britton's, could use her judgment about telling her or not." Mr. Morton pondered, his mind not wholly on the girl whom they had just left; then, remembering his nephew, he brought his thoughts down to the present. "I should risk the impertinence if I were you, Dennis. But what about the address?" "I know the village in the county," Dennis said eagerly. "I should think that would find her. I will do it when I get back." But it proved more difficult to write than he imagined, and it was some time before, having succeeded to his satisfaction, he brought the letter to his uncle for criticism. It ran thus: "Dear Madam, I am afraid you may think it rather impertinent on my part to write to you, but I hope you will forgive that, and my apparent interference. I am Dennis Morton, whom your niece met some time ago on the way to Dole, and as my uncle and I were passing this way in returning from a little tour, we called on Miss Britton, and both thought her looking ill. The doctor here is, I believe, quite good, but Mademoiselle Thérèse, though doubtless a worthy lady, would to me be rather trying in time of illness. I should not write to you, but I fear Miss Britton will not, being unwilling to worry you or any of those at home. My uncle made a suggestion on the matter to Mademoiselle Thérèse, which was not very much liked by that lady, therefore he thought I might write to you. He asks me, if you still remember him as a past acquaintance, to give you his regards. Hoping you will forgive my officiousness, yours truly, Dennis Morton." "That is quite passable," Mr. Morton said when he had read it. "I think you will hardly give offence. I wonder if she remembers me?" "She could hardly help doing that," and Dennis nodded affectionately at his uncle. "But I shall be much happier when this letter arrives at its destination. The address is not very exact. However, we will see, and we can call again to-morrow. It would be kind, don't you think, to one of our kith, so to speak, and in a foreign land?" The uncle smiled. "It would be kind, as you say, Dennis, so we will do it." But when they called the following afternoon they were told that Miss Britton was in bed and Mademoiselle Thérèse engaged. As a matter of fact, she was in the midst of composing a letter to Mrs. Britton, for when Barbara had said as carelessly as she could, that she would stay in bed just for one day, Mademoiselle Thérèse, remembering her visitor's remarks the previous afternoon, had taken alarm and sent for the doctor, and now thought it would be wiser to write to Mrs. Britton. Having wasted a good many sheets of paper, and mourned the letter over several times to herself, she sought her sister out. "Listen," she said proudly. "I think I have succeeded admirably in telling Mrs. Britton the truth, and yet not alarming her, at the same time showing her that by my knowledge of her language I am not unfitted to teach others. Honoured Madam, I am permitting myself to write to you about your dear daughter, who has entwined herself much into our hearts. There are now some few days she has seemed a little indisposed, and at last we succeeded in persuading her to retire to bed, and called in the worthy and most respectable, not to say gifted, family doctor, who gives us his attention in times of illness. He expressed his opinion that it was a species of low fever, what the dear young lady had contracted, out of the kindness of her good heart, in visiting in time of sickness the small sister of the bath boy, a profession which you do not have in England. That shows my knowledge of their customs, you see," the reader could not refrain from interpolating; then she continued with a flourish, and the daughter of a worthy blanchisseuse, who is in every respect very clean and orderly, therefore we thought to be trusted with the presence of your daughter, but whom in the future we will urge the advisability of leaving unvisited." Mademoiselle paused a moment for breath, for the sentence was a long one, and she had rolled it out with enjoyment. "Of course," she said to her sister, "I have not yet visited the house of this blanchisseuse, but I inquired if it was clean, and would not have allowed the girl to go if the report had not been favourable. But to continue, your daughter, in the excellence of her heart, would not, perhaps, desire to rouse your anxieties by mentioning her indisposition, but we felt it incumbent upon us, in whose charge she lies, to inform her relatives, and above all her devoted mother. With affectuous regards, yours respectably, Thérèse Loiré." "There!" exclaimed the writer in conclusion. "Do you not think that is a fine letter?" Her sister shrugged her shoulders. "Probably it is, but you forget I cannot understand English. But pray do not trouble to translate it," she added hastily. "I quite believe it is all you say." "Yes, you may believe that," and Mademoiselle Thérèse closed the envelope. "I think it will make an impression." In belief she was perfectly right, and perhaps it was a fortunate thing that Aunt Anne was there to help remove the impression, for that lady, having already had Denis Morton's letter, was prepared for this one, and was glad she had been able to tell the news in her own way to her sister-in-law the day before. "Don't look so scared, Lucy," she said. "I don't suppose there is anything much amiss, though I shall just pack up and go at once. What an irritating woman this must be! Quite enough to make anyone feel ill if she talks as she writes." With characteristic promptitude Miss Britton began to make her preparations immediately, and only halted over them once, and that was when she hesitated about packing a dress that had just come home, which she said was ridiculously young for her. "It will get very crushed," she muttered discontentedly. "But then, oh well, I might as well put it in," and in it went. Miss Britton hovered anxiously about her, and watched her proceedings wistfully. "You don't think I should go too, do you, Anne?" she asked. "Not at present, certainly," Miss Britton returned promptly, regarding her with her head on one side. "I promise I will let you know exactly how things are, and whether you would be better there. I would say don't worry if I thought it were the least good, but of course you will." Then she stooped and fastened a strap of her trunk. It was a most sensible thing of the young Morton to write straight away, and probably, if they are there, they will be quite sure to see Barbara has all she wants. The uncle always was a kind-hearted man. Then she straightened her back and declared everything was ready. She crossed by night from Southampton to St. Malo, and was greatly afraid that she would arrive looking a wreck, and to prevent that she partook largely of a medicine she had seen advertised as a certain cure for sea-sickness. Her surprise equalled her delight when she awoke in the morning, having slept peacefully all night, and she refused to believe that her good night was probably owing to the calmness of the sea, and not to the medicine. She looked with a little dismay at the shouting, pushing crowd of porters and hotel touts waiting on the quay, wondering how she would manage to keep hold of her bag among them all, and as she crossed the gangway, clutched it more tightly than before. "No," she said, as some one took a hold of it as soon as her foot touched the quay, "you shall not take my bag. I would not trust it to any one of you. You should be ashamed of yourselves, screaming like wild Indians." It was just then that Denis Morton and his uncle came through the crowd. "That is she, there," the elder man said, recognising her after 14 years. "Go and help. I will wait here." It was at a crucial moment, when Miss Britton was really getting exasperated and rather desperate, that the young man came up, and she accepted his assistance and explanation with relief. "My uncle is down there," he said. "We have a fiacre waiting. There is always such a crush and rout on the quay, we thought we had better come to pilot you through." The young man, in spite of his easy bearing, had been a little anxious as to how the two would meet again, and dreaded lest there might be some embarrassment. But beyond an air of shyness that sat strangely on both, and a kind of amused wonder at meeting after so many years, there was nothing to show that they had been more than mere acquaintances, and the talk centred chiefly on Barbara. "She does not know you are coming yet," Denis said. "Mademoiselle Thérèse got your telegram, but said it would be better not to tell your niece in case the ship went down on the way." "What a cheerful person to live with!" Miss Britton ejaculated. "I'm afraid I may be very rude to her." "I hope not," Mr. Morton said. "It would do no good, and she seems to be an excellent lady in many ways." "We shall see," Miss Britton replied grimly, getting out of the fiacre, and Denis felt rather sorry for Mademoiselle Thérèse. But Miss Britton was often worse in imagination than in reality, and she behaved with all due politeness to both sisters, who met her at the door, and led her into the salon. She even bore a certain amount of Mademoiselle Thérèse's explanations with patience; then she